Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we're diving into a story that honestly feels like a dark piece of fiction, but I assure you, it is a terrifyingly real piece of American history. We're going to look closely at how one of the country's most notorious killers hid in plain sight for exactly 31 years. Think about that for a second. How does someone commit just unspeakable crimes while simultaneously functioning as a completely unremarkable, even respected pillar of their community? It's a fascinating, deeply disturbing question about the duality of human nature, and we're going to break down exactly how he pulled it off. Okay, let's dive into this. Just imagine this unbelievable paradox. On one side, you have a man who murdered 10 people over the span of 17 years. On the other side, a man who every single Sunday morning stood right at the front of his church and confidently led his congregation in prayer. His name was Dennis Rader. And for over 3 decades, the city of Wichita, Kansas, had absolutely no idea that the monster they were so desperately searching for was the exact same guy installing their home security systems, the same guy chaperoning their kids' scout camping trips, literally the same man reading scripture aloud from a pulpit every weekend. Now, to really understand the terror he inflicted, we gotta look at the name that completely paralyzed the city. So, 9 months after his first killings, this letter mysteriously shows up inside an engineering textbook at the Wichita Public Library. A librarian finds it, and inside is a highly detailed written confession to his first murders, along with a chilling warning that more killings were coming. And right at the bottom of that letter, the writer actually named himself. He said to call him BTK. Bind, torture, kill. It was this self-appointed moniker that basically made Wichita's blood run cold. 1974, 1977, 1985, 1991. Looking at the spacing between these years, it really reveals his terrifying patience. It all kicked off on a cold January morning in 1974. Rader was 28, married, just working at a local factory. He walks up to a house on Edgemore Street, cuts the phone line, and breaks in. Inside were Joseph and Julie Otero and their 2 young kids, Josie and Joey. Rader bound them all, strangled the parents, suffocated the boy, and systematically hanged the young girl. It was him executing this violent fantasy he'd been building up to since childhood. And the craziest part? Afterward, he just went home, had lunch, and went right back to his normal afternoon. Each year you see here marks a murder carefully planned through weeks, sometimes months of quiet surveillance. He actually gave every killing a military-style codename. He called them his projects. In one horrific instance, he murdered his own neighbor, a woman who literally waved at him every morning. After strangling her, he arranged her body for photographs in the very church where he was a council president. And then he later calmly assured her family that the neighborhood was safe and he'd look out for them. Just chillin'. But what was he doing in the years between these gruesome murders? Well, he lived an entirely normal life. He installed home security systems for neighbors who were terrified of, you guessed it, the very killer he was. He coached youth sports, he was the church council president, and perhaps the most ironic part of the whole shebang, he worked as a city compliance officer. In that role, he had the authority to issue citations for local ordinance violations, and he used this power obsessively. I mean, he'd cite his neighbors for having grass that was too tall, improper trash placement, unleashed dogs, you name it. Former coworkers described him as rigid, precise, and just deeply invested in control. You know, the kind of guy who reported people for breaking minor office policies. He blended in perfectly by masking his monstrous need for control behind the mundane, everyday rules of suburban life. So, after 1991, Rader just stopped killing. The case went cold. Investigators figured BTK was dead, maybe locked up for something else or had simply moved away. The city finally exhaled. But then, a single paragraph in the Wichita Eagle changed absolutely everything. It was 2004, marking the 30th anniversary of his first murders, and a reporter basically speculated in print that the killer had probably died. Well, Rader read that article, and it absolutely enraged his fragile ego. At 59 years old, with a loving wife and adoring daughter, he just couldn't stomach the idea that people had moved on. He couldn't stand that his 30 years of work were dismissed in a single newspaper paragraph. So what does he do to prove he's alive? He starts performing again. He took enormous, reckless risks just to get the spotlight back, sending dozens of communications to the media. We're talking packages, cereal boxes crammed with crime scene photos, victims' personal belongings, word puzzles, and even a bound doll. Now, what's really interesting about this next part is how that desperate need for attention directly caused his downfall through a massive, massive technological blunder. Let's walk through this. In January 2005, Rader sends a letter asking police if a floppy disk could be traced back to him. The police, playing it smart, took out a classified ad saying, "Rex, it will be okay." And unbelievably, he trusted them. He actually sent a floppy disk to a local TV station. Investigators immediately pulled up the metadata of a deleted Microsoft Word document on that very disk. And right there, they found the name of the last person who modified the file: Dennis. The document was quickly traced back to Christ Lutheran Church. A simple internet search revealed that the president of the Christ Lutheran Church Council was Dennis Rader. Okay, so they finally had their man, but they couldn't just barge in and arrest him. They needed concrete DNA evidence. And obviously, they couldn't risk tipping him off by just knocking on his door and asking for a swap. Instead, they found a pretty brilliant workaround. They managed to get a court order to access his daughter's medical records from a university health clinic from years earlier. They tested a routine medical sample of hers against the DNA they had recovered from BTK's crime scenes. The result? A familial match. Bullseye. On February 25, 2005, officers pulled Dennis Rader over while he was just casually driving home for lunch. When an officer asked if he knew why he was going downtown, Rader just looked right at him and said, "Oh, I have suspicions why." But catching a monster doesn't magically undo the damage. In fact, it often creates entirely new victims. And this brings us to his daughter, Carrie. When investigators arrived at her home to break the news, she completely collapsed. I mean, think about it. Every single memory, every morning her dad drove her to school, every hug, every ordinary Tuesday was instantly shattered and restructured into something totally unrecognizable. In her book, she asked this really devastating question. She writes, "Should I tell you that I grew up adoring you, that you were the sunshine of my life?" Her entire reality was just destroyed in a matter of seconds. Now, at his trial, Rader pled guilty to all 10 murders. But honestly, it was how he confessed that really chilled the courtroom. He literally stood there and described each killing with this calm, flat precision. He referred to the victims as his projects, explaining his methods exactly the way a craftsman would explain a woodworking technique. It was entirely devoid of emotion. Because Kansas didn't have the death penalty at the time of his crimes, the judge handed down 10 consecutive life terms, 175 years. That is the minimum amount of time Dennis Rader was sentenced to serve implicit. Which brings us to today. Rader is now 80 years old. He's still alive, and he is still locked up in the El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas. But his dark shadow definitely still lingers. In 2023, Oklahoma police named him the prime suspect in a 1976 unsolved missing girl cold case. Though, to be fair, searches of connected land haven't found anything conclusive just yet. And, super unsettlingly, he still monitors the outside world. When Rex Heuermann was arrested for the Gilgo Beach murders, Rader actually wrote a letter to the news media analyzing Heuermann as a clone of himself. He discussed the DNA evidence with what sounded terrifyingly like professional admiration, right from his prison cell. And that leaves us with the single most unexplainable truth of this entire explainer. How did a ruthless monster and a beloved father exist at the exact same time looking completely normal? His daughter, Carrie, made a really profound point. She said the hardest part wasn't just learning what he had done. It was the fact that for 26 years, the loving, present father who waved at neighbors and led Sunday school was completely real. But the monster who hunted human beings in the dark was also real. They existed in the exact same body, sleeping in the exact same bed. Neither one canceled the other out. So as you reflect on this, ask yourself, how well can we ever truly know the people standing right next to us in the bright light of day?
True Files Archive.